Today we're going to take a look at a history of American foreign policy and particularly the foreign policy options available to the United States. So how do we carry out foreign policy? What can we do to carry out that policy? So our goals for today are to explain the various reasons for U.S. foreign policy, to describe the various parts of the government that create and implement foreign policy, to describe the foreign policy options available, and to describe the various positions on the foreign policy continuum. So we begin with a quote from Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State. He said, "America has no permanent friends or enemies, only interests." And what he means by this is when America deals in foreign policy, really everything that we do is based on our own self-interest. It's always in what's in the best interest of the United States. So whenever we make decisions, it's usually not about right or wrong, it's about what can help America. So we can come up with a list of reasons for American foreign policy. The first one would be our national interest. So one of the reasons, and probably the most common reason why we get involved in foreign policy in international affairs, is to protect the interests of the United States. A second reason, sometimes we want to play the good guy in the world, and that is for humanitarian reasons, so helping out after an earthquake or a hurricane or some other type of natural disaster, or helping people in a starving country. Sometimes we do it just to be the good guy, but again, that goes back to our national interest. We want to look like the good guy in the world. Human rights. We are a firm believer in the idea of human rights, or what Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, and Montesquieu would have called natural rights. And so we want to protect those natural rights in the world, not just in America. And then finally, for development. You may remember from U.S. history the idea of the first, second, and third world, or the developing or lesser developed countries in the world. Sometimes we want to help those struggling countries kind of make their way into the modern world. Of course, usually when we do this, it's for our own national interest because we have some money to gain. We've got some profit to be made. When it comes to implementing American foreign policy, there are a number of parts of the government responsible for this. And of course, the president, the executive branch, is in charge of our foreign policy. But usually the president can't take care of things on his own, and so it's one of his cabinet departments, the State Department, which is headed by the Secretary of State, who is in charge of taking care of our foreign policy. Of course, even the Secretary of State can't be there all the time, and so in each country, the United States has an official representative known as an ambassador. So if we recognize a country as being a legitimate country in the world, we will send an ambassador to negotiate on behalf of the United States. And these are political appointments that are appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. Finally, in any foreign country where we have diplomatic relations, where we send an ambassador, we also have an embassy. So in the photo you see the Embassy of the United States, which is in the middle of Ottawa in Canada. And technically speaking, when you are on embassy property, when you're in a foreign country, if you're on embassy property, you're back on American soil. So all American laws apply well in the embassy. Foreign countries can't come within the embassy. What happens in those walls is only governed by the United States. Same thing for foreign embassies in the United States. For example, if you went to the Embassy of Cameroon in Washington, D.C., you would be required to follow the laws of Cameroon because technically you are on their land and in their territory. Whenever America makes a foreign policy decision, we have three different options. We can act unilaterally, uni meaning one. That means we do things by ourselves. We can do things bilaterally, bi meaning two. We can work with another country. Or we can do things multilaterally, which means work with several different countries. Now, in a perfect world, we always want to try to do things multilaterally. If more than one country has a say, if multiple countries have a say, that makes us look a lot better and not like a world bully. If there's only one of us, then that makes us look like a bully. So we always try to do things bilaterally, in a perfect world, multilaterally. Some things that we can use in order to negotiate foreign policy. The first strategy is diplomacy. This is always the ideal strategy. We always like to use diplomacy, and what we mean by diplomacy is simply talking things over, discussing things in a civil manner. Policy we have available is economic, and there are actually two different types of economic functions that we can use as part of foreign policy. The first is foreign aid or humanitarian aid. What that means is if we want a country to do something positive. If we want to encourage a country to do something, we would give them what's called foreign aid, or sometimes humanitarian aid, or sometimes just aid. And aid is basically giving a country money in the hopes that they'll do something favorable to us. So, for example, the largest recipient of American foreign aid would be Egypt and Israel. They get a lot of money from us to help poverty in their country, to help rebuild their country, to help build weapon systems within their country. And the reason why we give them so much money is because we want them to help us out. On the other hand, the other option available to us is sanctions. Sanction is actually a restriction on trade for a country. This would be a negative type of approach to take. So for example, right now we don't approve of the decisions made by North Korea. We don't approve of them expanding their nuclear weapons program, and so we have placed economic sanctions on them. We have basically said that America cannot and will not trade with North Korea. Another foreign policy option we have, which we tried to avoid, is military intervention. That is sending in the troops, basically fighting a war. So if we have a preemptive strike, that means we strike first. A defensive strike means somebody hits us and we are just responding. So for example, in the war in Iraq, we had a preemptive strike. We wanted to attack Saddam Hussein before he attacked us. But in the case of Pearl Harbor, we had a defensive strike. The Japanese had attacked first and we were just defending ourselves. Another option, covert action. Covert means secret. It means undercover. Usually this is done by the CIA or sometimes an organization like the Army Rangers or the Navy SEALs. And usually these things are not things that we widely talk about. In the 1970s, we tried to overthrow several governments in Central and South America because they were communist. We didn't do this very openly. This was covert. It was secret, behind the scenes. And then finally, cultural exchanges. Sometimes this is in the form of an exchange student. Sometimes it's just inviting people to the country or the embassy to learn more about that country or embassy. For example, on the close-up trip last year, 2 years ago, I went to the embassy of Cameroon, and they fed me food from Cameroon and talked about the culture and got to meet people from Cameroon. And so this would be another approach to foreign policy. When we talk about things, we often talk about a foreign policy continuum. You may have gone over this in U.S. history. It's like any other continuum. It's a sliding scale. It's not like it's one of four things, but we'll put the four basic categories out there. The first category is isolationism. And U.S. history teachers sometimes nickname this the loner approach. Whenever we are an isolationist nation, we have strict non-involvement in foreign affairs. Basically, we're minding our own business. We're not getting involved in foreign countries' business. The second option, and probably the most used today, is collective security, or what U.S. history teachers will call team player. A team player means that we don't do things on our own. We act with other countries to try to achieve a goal. So, for example, if we work with NATO or the United Nations, we're not working alone. We're working with other countries. Internationalism, or what's sometimes nicknamed world policeman, means that we will intervene in any case in which it's in our national interest. So anytime it will benefit the United States and the United States only, we get involved in foreign affairs. And then finally, there's the idea of imperialism, or sometimes what's nicknamed world bully. And this is where we go to try to take over territory just because we're the big bad United States and we can do so. Another foreign policy continuum we can look at is the idea of idealism versus realism. Idealism is what we'd like to do in a perfect world. It's if we could get our way, if there were no political realities, if everything just went perfectly the way we wanted them to, this would be the idea of idealism. On the other side, there is realism. It's what has to be done based on the situation. So maybe in a perfect world, we would like to negotiate things diplomatically. We would hope that that works. But in a realistic world, maybe we have to use military action. Maybe we have to go in and intervene that way. And so a big part of foreign policy is trying to balance idealism versus realism. Next, we've got the idea of isolation versus interventionism. And this is just another way of simplifying the other foreign policy continuum we've looked at. In the case of isolationism, that means, of course, we're not getting involved in world affairs. We're minding our own business. We're not getting involved. And the other side, intervention, means that we're actively involved in world affairs. And again, it's a continuum. It's a sliding scale. So it's not like we're one or the other. We could be anywhere in this multiple of different places on the continuum. Well, that's all we've got for today. Next, we're going to take a look at some historical examples of American foreign policy and how American foreign policy has been carried out throughout the years. Have a great day.